Today on RTC60, we'd like to welcome Matthew Horn to our show. Matthew is a 1998 Rochester High School graduate. You might remember him from playing for the Rochester Zebra basketball team. Matthew went ahead to graduate from Purdue University in the School of Business in the year 2002. He now serves as Chief Financial Officer out at Modern Materials, and he and his wife just welcomed a baby daughter in about a month ago. So welcome to the show, Matthew.
Thank you very much.
The reason Matthew's on today, he's entering a new and exciting area of his life. He is an author of books. He's the author of the book called The Good Fight. You can find this throughout the community of Rochester and other places, and we'll get to that. But Matthew, how did you get involved with writing?
It was actually kind of interesting how that worked out. I've always thought about it. When I was in college, I remember I was reading a book by Tom Clancy called Rainbow Six.
Okay.
And I thought that I could try to give this a shot. And I got about a paragraph into it and realized that it required a lot more in-depth information than I was going to have, and so I quit. But 8 or 9 years later, I was at home with my wife and was reading another book, a fantasy novel by Terry Brooks. And again, I thought, I feel like I could just give this a shot. And so I went and I wrote one sentence and realized that if I was going to write a book, I was going to have to know who my character was and who his family was and his likes and his dislikes. And so I ended up writing a 6 or 7 page outline, which led me into a 600-page epic fantasy novel, which I did not see coming, but apparently it's been in me for a long time, and so it finally came out all at once.
Okay. So when you're just sitting around in the home or whatever, and you have thoughts, do you write them down to perhaps use in a book at a later time?
I discovered that something that's very helpful is to actually keep a journal.
Okay.
So I do have something that I keep with me, and anytime I feel like that would be an interesting story or this would be something to add to something, I try to write it down as best I can. It doesn't stay with me very long.
Yeah. As you get older, it's even worse.
Yeah.
So you say you had a 600-page fantasy book written.
Mm-hmm.
Have you published that book?
No. Actually, when I started that, I knew nothing about the publishing industry. That was just my first attempt, my first foray, and when I started letting friends and family read it, I started getting some feedback like, you should check to see if you can get this published. And when I did, I found out that for a first-time author, it was too big. It needed to be heavily edited, which was going to be a serious process that I wasn't very good at yet.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why that book is actually still, we're in the process of going through it now.
Okay.
But it ended up being a lot bigger than I had even anticipated it might be when I started, so it's going to be a process.
So then the first book that you decided to publish is the one we have here, The Good Fight.
Yep, this is my first book. It got published when I was starting the process for my first novel.
Mm-hmm.
To go through it. I found out from an online resource that a good thing to do to take your mind off of what you're working on is to just write a second book. Go with something completely different, take your mind completely off of it, and so that was where I created this one.
Okay. And then if you don't mind, without giving the story away, what is The Good Fight? What is that about?
Well, I had intended, I like to put, C.S. Lewis is someone that I try to emulate.
Okay.
He's the author of the Chronicles of Narnia, and I try to put a very subtle Christian theme throughout the backs of my book. And what I had intended was to try and symbolize how hard it can be to make the right decision every day, all the time. And so that was where I got the title, and that was what I intended this book to be about. It's about a young boy at the age of 9. He's got a troubled home life. He's actually on the street, and his life is saved by a vigilante. So it's a defining moment for him. It helps him get his life on track. 16 years later, he's close to graduating from college and starting his career when he has the opportunity to return the favor to the vigilante. He actually saves his life, and in doing so, he discovers the man's identity and discovers that he's not quite the true hero that my lead character thought he was going to be. So as the book progresses, he kind of becomes the reluctant protege, if you will, and by the end he has to decide whether he can ignore what he knows is going on and try to live his life as he had intended, or does he have to assume the role of vigilante himself in order to try and stop his once hero from doing something horrible.
Wow. That's I had so many questions when I'm hearing that. When you started writing this book, did you have this plot already in mind, or do you start writing and then go from there? It's kind of
funny.
reactionary?
It was kind of a process. I remember when I first had the idea for it, my original intent was I wanted to do something about some young hero coming into himself and having a mentor as he did it. And I ran the idea past my wife, and she kind of turned up her nose at me and told me that there'd be a lot more conflict if the mentor was kind of a good guy, bad guy role, where the reader really gets to decide what's going on there. So it didn't end up the way I had originally intended it, but I think it ended up a lot better this way.
That's fascinating. Anything that from your time growing up in Rochester that went into this book at all? I mean,
well, it sounds a little strange, but I have always heroes in every sense have always been my dreams. Growing up with James Bond or John Wayne or Michael Jordan, these I always emulated that, and I was always was never really into comic books so much, but I've always loved to read, and I've always loved superheroes. And when growing up playing outside with my friends, it was always what one of us always had super strength or could fly or something, and I bring a lot of that inner immature child, I guess, to my creation of these stories.
Okay. Now, to get a little bit more specific on the book itself, how does one go about, and then you write your story, how does one go about getting it published? Tell us that story.
It turns out that that's pretty complicated.
Yeah.
And it's working as a chief financial officer for a company in the automotive industry. The publishing industry it's night and day. It moves very slowly. It's very big brother. It's really complicated. So when I first started out, I learned that when you do write a book, when you've got something that you're going for, the first thing you have to do is put together what they call a query letter, and it's a lot like a cover letter if you're going for a job. But in this query letter, you're sending it out to agents, and you're sending it out to smaller publishers, and you're basically trying to sell your book to them in less than 3 paragraphs. And it's pretty stressful. It's really hard to do. But the big publishers, Random House and all these guys, they don't ever talk to guys like me. Mm-hmm. They will only talk to agents, and usually bigger agents who are trying to push their, people's books. So what I did with this was I went and had it professionally edited. Meredith and I talked and decided that we were going to put a little money into it, have it professionally edited. And then when we got that done, I put together a query letter, and I just started sending it out. And Brighton Publishing in Chandler, Arizona, liked the query letter and offered me a contract.
How was the editing process? Did they take out some parts of your book that you thought, what are they doing?
Yeah, the editing process was definitely the hardest part for me. The first thing that I learned was I like classic novels, and something that you'll find in books written 100 years ago is a lot more passive voice. The writer will tell you what's in the characters' minds and explain things to you that are going on that you can't see, whereas in today's writing, everyone really likes to see a lot more action-packed and a lot more direct. They want you to show what the character is thinking by what he does rather than just telling the reader. Mm-hmm. So the editor, she gave me what she called the Golden Axe Award, because we went through it and went back through the whole thing and ended up cutting and chopping and changing and moving around, and just it was a big job, and I wasn't ready for it. It was probably the hardest thing to hear, was to have someone come back to me about my writing and tell me that mm-hmm. they thought it would be much better if we were to do this, or let's just take this out, or what are you doing with this sentence? That was pretty hard to go through, but
I'm sure it was. That's your passion. You put all your time into that, and somebody's saying no.
Yeah,
this is the way we have to do it.
Yep.
And I guess the bottom line is you want to meet your passion, but you also want people to read your book.
Right,
So
right. And you wanted to trust the experience of a professional editor, and that she knew what she was doing and would be able to help me.
Another thing I wanted to get is the actual cover of the directory, and I think everybody will be able to see this in our background. How do you go about choosing the cover, or do you?
Yeah, actually, the publisher was very good about taking input from me and seeing where I wanted to go. In fact, when we first started with the cover, they had read the book when they were deciding whether to sign me or not. And the guy that I worked with, Don McGuire, he actually had quite a few ideas his own after finishing the book of what he thought would be a really neat cover. I had a couple ideas too. So when I actually had my older sister draw up what I thought would be the mask of the vigilante, what he would wear, and I thought that would make a really cool cover. So when I was talking to him about it, he thought that superimposing that over a picture of the alley, which is that's the prologue, it all takes place in a dark alley behind a restaurant. He thought that, superimposing that over this picture would be really neat. So he had his artist take my sister's renderings and come up with the mask, and then we sifted through 200 or 300 photographs, actually all from Chicago, because that's where the book takes place, and finally found one. We actually found a couple, but they ended up being really expensive. So we ended up finding one that had everything we were looking for, and to finally put it all together. But the publisher was really great. Their artists and his ideas on being able to put together, superimposing the mask over the alley was really neat.
I think it's a fascinating cover. I would think, specifically being a first-time author, the presentation, that being the cover and the title, are so important.
Yeah.
Because you have to somehow have somebody select your book to read.
I'm kind of pulling this number. I don't know if this is right or not, but publishers granting ISBN numbers to authors last year, it was something like 1.3 million books, new books published last year.
Wow.
So it's I'm one amongst millions and millions and millions. So you're right. Presentation is a very big deal.
Now, did you pick the title, The Good Fight?
Yes.
Before you wrote the book, or after you wrote the book?
That actually, it came right in the very beginning.
Okay.
That was for some reason, all of the books that I have been putting together, the ones that I have, this one, the next one that's being published, and all the others that I've started and have ideas on, the title is usually something that comes first.
Okay.
I'm sure that's very different than many other writers, but for me, whatever reason, when I start to see the story mold together, the title usually jumps right out at me.
I got you. Now, how can somebody in Fulton County get a copy of The Good Fight?
Well, we do have some print books actually in town. We have books at Webb's Family Pharmacy, at Arnold's Jeweler. There are some at the Trendy Fox. We've got them at the Wellness Center, and even Ron Smith over at Smithsonian Smith has some out for me. So they can be purchased locally. But also, if you're on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, you can actually just do a search, The Good Fight and Matthew Horn, and find it that way. You can also go to www.matthewrhorn.com, and we've got links on the side there where you can get it.
Okay, and you're talking about future books. I understand you have another one ready to go. Is that
yes? As soon as I signed the contract to get this published, my publisher told me he thought I should start working on the sequel. So I actually started work on that, and I finished it a couple months ago, and we've spent the last 3 or 4 months going through the editing process. We actually went through it ourselves this time, and it's called Nothing Good is Free, and we're actually in the process of signing the contracts now, so it'll probably be about 8 months or so, but we're in the process of getting that one published right now.
Well, super. Well, Matthew, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and in case you haven't read the book, it's called The Good Fight. There's plenty of places you can buy it. Sounds like everything's going great, and congratulations for fulfilling a dream of yours.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for having me on.
Yes.